Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to Merryn Talks Your Money, the personal finance edition of Merryn Talks Money. In these bonus podcasts, we talk about the best strategies for making the most of your money. I'm Merryn Somerset Webb, and with me, senior reporter and money distilled author John Stepek. Hi, John.
Hi, Merryn.
Okay, so this week, we're answering a very special question because it comes from one of our very own producers. Moses, what's on your mind this week about your money?
All right. I'll tell you, Merryn. So,
Okay.
I've been with my girlfriend for just over 8 years. We are very committed to each other and don't plan on breaking up. But we question whether it's worth getting married or whether we should just keep things as they are now. We are renting a place at the moment and plan to eventually buy a place at some point in the future. But putting the romance of it all to one side, we're curious on what the practical benefits are of getting married.
Okay. All right. Interesting. I mean, I'm interested at the very beginning. Am I allowed to ask you a question back before we start?
Yes, absolutely. That's why I'm here.
When you say we're questioning whether it's worth getting married, well, clearly you're not just talking about financial benefits. What do you mean by worth?
Well, the way that we see it is that at the moment, we know that we want to be together for a very, very long time. But getting married, it seems like a lot of fuss, right? The whole wedding and then having to potentially change names, all that sort of stuff. But is there an actual practical benefit to it?
All right. First thing I would say is it doesn't have to be difficult. Registry office, keep your own names.
Okay.
10 minutes, done, dusted.
Yeah.
All good.
Okay. That's
so,
good.
it could be really, really easy. Don't need to have a £20,000 wedding.
Okay.
Don't need to invite 200 people.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So bearing that in mind, can we make it worth it for you if we assume you're only going to have a quick 10-minute wedding at the registry office? No big dinner, no champagne, nothing. 10 minutes, in, out, job done.
I'm very open to it.
Okay.
I'm very open to it.
Excellent. Right. John, are you an expert here?
I'm not an expert.
John's married, by the way, so he's automatically an expert.
Yeah, I see. One thing I identify with, and I actually think a lot of men, certainly, I don't feel I can speak for women, but certainly for men I've talked to, the idea of being married was always quite attractive for me, but the idea of actually getting married was a bit of a pain in the backside, because it is all very well saying go to a registry office, do what you want to do. One of the problems with marriage is that it involves a wider group of people than just you a lot of the time. So it depends on how your relationships are with various other parts of your family as to how happy they might be or might not be with the wedding that you want, as opposed to the wedding that they wish you would have.
I think this is not that kind of podcast, John.
I know, but I think
please send in your emotional dilemmas.
You got to think about the emotional sides of all of these things when it comes to finance. I'm always gibbering about investment psychology, so marriage psychology is
all right,
there
so
too.
what you're telling me here, John, is that lots of men don't want to get married because admin and in-laws.
Basically,
yeah,
yes.
okay, fine.
I think so. Oh, no,
right.
Not necessarily in-laws. It might be their own kind of families as well. But no, but other than that, inheritance tax is probably the biggest, most obvious factor.
Yeah, I think we should start with the little ones.
Yeah,
and move on to
that makes
inheritance
sense.
tax. Let's start with the little bits. Okay, the first one is there is actually a marriage tax allowance. There is a tiny little financial benefit to getting married if one of you is not using up their full income tax allowance. So you have to have one person who is not an income taxpayer and one person who is an income taxpayer, and the non-payer can transfer part of their personal allowance, their personal income tax allowance, to the taxpayer. They can transfer a maximum of 10% of that allowance, which means that there will be £1,260 that goes tax-free that wouldn't have been tax-free otherwise, saving you a massive £252 a year. Are we done here, Moses? Did I do it for you? It's not enough. Not enough.
Well,
Not
there's
enough.
also
Not
one
enough. No
small There's one small problem in that your spouse has to be a basic rate taxpayer as well.
Yes, that too.
So if they're a 40% taxpayer, then that's out the window. So
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
That's one benefit, though.
The next thing that I think is attractive about this, and this again will only apply to a small number of people, is that you can inherit a defined benefit pension. Right? And we always talk about how wonderful defined benefit pensions are, but a lot of defined benefit pensions, not all, but I'd say the majority, come with the ability for the surviving spouse, and they do adhere to the word spouse pretty carefully. I don't think you can nominate anyone else. And if you aren't married on the death, then it's generally not inheritable. Remember that a pension is controlled by the trustees as opposed to by you yourself in this kind of case. But in the main, if you're married, you will usually get mostly 50%, I think it is these days, sometimes 2/3 of a DB pension. Now, not very many people have DB pensions anymore, but if you happen to have one and you would like your partner to inherit some of it on your death, then getting married is a really good idea. Now, that's a big money one, Moses. I don't think you have a DB pension, but...
Yeah, no, I don't. But I'm pretty sure that my partner is already assigned as being the recipient of my pension if anything happens to me anyway.
Sorry, that's a defined contribution. Let's say that you had a defined benefit pension, one of those wonderful ones that John and I would like to have that comes automatically every month, inflation linked, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to do anything. The problem is their problem, not your problem. Very nice. If you were not married, that would die with you. If you were married, your lucky wife would get a large percentage of it.
Okay,
now that's nice.
I see.
Right?
That is great.
This is not one for you, but maybe one for some other people. What next?
Should we point out, by the way,
yes, John,
that we're including civil partnerships here. So it's civil partnerships and marriage have got the same rules in case anyone's confused about that.
And I would like to add something to that, by the way, which is there is no such thing as a common law marriage. Yes. If you do not actually get around to getting married and doing the admin for getting married, sorry, Moses, you are not married. There is no such thing as a common law partnership that gives you the same rights as being married. It's a myth that will not go away.
And I mean, that's really important because so many people think that the rules are slightly more complicated in Scotland, but even then, it's not that complicated. It's basically the same. And if you want to get, if you like, I think it's a cohabitation agreement, but even then, the amount of admin you need to do to get a cohabitation agreement, you might as well just go and get married. You know, I would suggest, but looking at it. But yeah, that's really important. Just because you've lived together for X number of years doesn't mean that your spouse, so you're not your spouse.
Not your
the person you're living with is not entitled to it. And if you are living together, make sure if you own a property, then it should be owned jointly. If you are in a relationship and your name is not on the mortgage, then make sure that, find out why that is and get it on the mortgage, or get rid of the person.
All right. Thanks, John. Back to marriage.
Sorry.
We're not getting rid of people here. Not where we're going. Right. So an awful lot of this, I'm afraid, an awful lot of the benefits of being married are about death. So sorry.
Yes.
But I want to move on to ISAs. So you can inherit an ISA from your spouse. So when they die, their ISA comes to you inside its wrapper. You inherit the wrapper itself. So what it ends up with is you end up with a second allowance in the year of your spouse's death. So you get your own 20,000 allowance, and then their wrapper is transferred over to you. So that's nice. That's a good one.
That is good.
Yeah. John's looking doubtful about that. Do you think I've got that wrong, John?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I'm just thinking, yes, that's one I hadn't thought of.
Okay, so I think that's
quite
a very
new
good one
as well, isn't it?
That's definitely a reason to get married, inheriting an ISA. ISAs are the perfect investment wrapper. The other ones are really, again, about the transfer of allowances. We'll come back to death in a minute. We'll come back to IHT. John is absolutely itching to talk about IHT. But there's also the transfer of capital gains allowances, right? So there's no capital gains when you transfer something from yourself to your spouse. If you transfer something to somebody else, you have to pay capital gains on the transfer. But between you, and this is even before you're dead, you can transfer that allowance around. So if you have something that you want to sell and it's going to use up all of your capital gains allowance, you can transfer some of it to your spouse, and then they can sell that bit and use their capital gains allowance as well. So that's a particularly useful one, not the capital allowance. Gains allowances are quite what they used to be, but nonetheless, that is a useful advantage to being married. I can see Moses is really getting into this. You're nearly over the line, aren't you, Moses?
Hey, I'm there. Yeah, I'm almost sold.
It's all about the tax efficiency.
All about tax efficiency. All right, John, IHT.
Yeah, I mean, inheritance tax is just so everyone's got a £325,000 inheritance tax allowance. And if you're married and you die, everything goes over to your spouse, and that includes your allowance. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do any admin. You don't even have to have a will. You should have a will, but if you don't, then they'll still get your allowance. And so that means that they automatically have £650,000 they can pass on. And if you've got a family home that's worth, at least £350,000, then that's £1 million in total you can pass on. If you're not married, then you're going to have to write a will to make sure that you use up your IHT allowance when you die. Otherwise, it'll die with you. And then your spouse doesn't automatically, not your spouse, the person you're living with doesn't inherit your allowance. And so basically,
I think we can call the person who isn't the spouse the non-spouse for the purposes
the non-spouse.
of the non-spouse.
Yes. The non-spouse, the non-spouse doesn't automatically inherit any of your allowances, and so basically you're back to a massive admin nightmare, and B, there is also there's the fact that obviously life is uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen, and a lot of the time you get one of the reasons that things like the spousal allowance eventually was automatically transferred was because you got all of these kind of somewhat tragic stories about people who died unexpectedly and then their partner's left with a nightmare or kicked out of their house because they have an IHT liability that they shouldn't have had if they were better organised. The problem is if you're not married, you can end up in that position. So that is one very good reason to get married, and it gets 10 times worse if you get kids, because if you get kids, and again, you're not on top of your admin and you aren't married, then the situation when you die is much more complicated than if you are married.
And it's different in Scotland and England, right? Because the state has different ways of dividing up your property if you've
the intestacy laws are different. I don't know the exact details of how they're different, but it's still the point is it's like if you don't want the person you've had kids with to be left high and dry in the event of something bad happening, you either need to make sure that you cross every T and dot every I sharpish, or you can get married and there's an element of protection from that, even if the worst does happen.
Yeah. Right. So that's IHT, which I think is an excellent reason to get married. But I want to go briefly back to your earlier thing you mentioned earlier, Moses, about an expression of wishes on your pension. So most of us have a DC pension, a defined contribution. Did we talk about this too much? I don't know. No, it's not possible to talk about pensions too much, isn't it? With a DC pension, you need to make it clear who you want the money to go to on your death. So you need to fill in any pension provider will have a form. You fill it in with your expression of wishes, and it's not. This is the interesting thing. It's an expression of wishes because legally it's not your decision to make because the pension funds are controlled by the pension trustees. But again, if you make that expression of wishes, it would be very bizarre for that not to happen. So make sure you do that on your DC.
Yeah, and I mean, the other interesting thing about pensions is that it takes quite a long time for the process after someone dies, as I've learned from experience, for it to then get passed on to their partner, or it can do. So definitely make sure that the wishes are very, very clear, because you want that admin to go as smoothly as it possibly can. And certainly in my experience, pension providers are not the fastest at dealing with stuff.
No, can't think why. Now, the other reason to get married is all these endless studies showing you that married people are happier than people who are not married. Do you buy that, John? You look pretty happy. John's a happy guy. I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, assuming you've got a happy marriage, I do take a lot of these studies with a pinch of salt, because I don't see how they can control for the other factors. There's got to be an element of self-selection in there when they approach people.
Might
But
the
no, I mean,
happiness
broadly
just,
speaking.
yeah, it might the happiness just be in finding someone you want to be married to.
I think it's more the couples that end up taking part in these studies are probably basically quite happy and not wildly dysfunctional.
You think
And
they
obviously
don't?
there are
Yeah.
some people in bad marriages, but
Yeah.
other than that,
They don't ask divorced
So-
people, do they?
well, yeah, exactly. Actually, there's a survivorship bias going on
Absolutely.
there. That's what it is.
It is. It's
exactly.
a massive
Yes.
survivorship bias. Yeah. Okay,
So
so
no,
there we
you're
go.
quite right.
Don't get
That's,
married because it'll make you happy. The act of getting married in itself will not make you happy. There are some other factors to include there. Do get married to avoid admin and transfer your tax allowances around the place. Does that sum things up?
Yeah, and also that will make you happier, not having to do as much admin.
Yeah. Any admin you don't have to do is automatic joy. So, Moses, when do the invitations arrive? John and I are ready. We're free for the next 6 months or so, aren't we, John?
All right.
Yeah,
I have
absolutely.
a hat.
Really?
Yep.
Okay,
absolutely.
excellent. All right. Well, I'll be passing by Hatton Garden on the way home, and yeah, my mind has changed. But no, I'm not sure that actually like being married would make me any happier, because I don't think it would, because I feel like I already live a life in which like I'm basically married to my
It wouldn't make
girlfriend
you feel more
already.
secure.
No,
Or
I don't think
contained as a
so.
unit.
Because like
No.
I feel like if someone wants to leave you, they can leave you anyway, and then I'm not sure that like a piece of paper would really stop them. However, I do think that everything to do with the financial side of things, should I pass away and leave her, then I think that's actually like super important, because statistically speaking, I probably will pass away before her. And if we do have kids, I don't want for her to experience any extra stress of sorting out all of the admin and the paperwork. Like, it's not worth it.
Interesting. We can sell people anything, can't we, John, by telling them there's less admin. You know? And the other thing I would say, Moses, is that it is actually, it's quite a lot harder to leave somebody if you're married to them, because divorce is piles of admin. So much admin.
There we go.
And so if we want to avoid admin, get married, stay married. And that's the message from this podcast, which seems to be changing its focus slightly. We'll straight back to pure finance next week. Thanks for listening to this week's Merryn Talks Money. If you like our show, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to follow me and John on X or Twitter @MerrynSW and John_Stepek. This episode was produced by Samasadi, production support from Moses and thank you, Moses. Sound designed by Blake Maples. Questions and comments on this show and all our shows always welcome. Our show email is merrynmoney@bloomberg.net. Want to listen to episodes of Merryn Talks Money ad-free? Become a Bloomberg.com subscriber today. Check out our special intro offer right now at Bloomberg.com/podcast offer, or click the link in the show notes. You'll also unlock deep reporting, data, and analysis from reporters around the world. If you're already a Bloomberg.com subscriber, connect your account with Apple Podcasts to listen to this episode ad-free.